And I'm putting the plow on the front, and the couplers. And the one thing about the coupler, even though it's a very minor detail in my opinion, is that the coupler is something that, like a lot of things, a lot like the horn and that kind of stuff, the coupler does stick out. It doesn't stick out, but in my opinion, your eye does catch the coupler. So the one thing I do as a general rule, like just about everything else, but it's important that you measure the front and back coupler. And like on this, they're basically a ½ an inch from the rail. And it's important that you measure the front and back coupler so that they're basically the same height from each other off the ground. And just sort of generally, you want the front and back coupler to be the same size as each other so that your eye just sees that they're in the same scale, because a lot of details get painted over and stay inside the drawing, which is what I was starting to say about the underframe. The underframe, the good thing about the underframe is, I will fully admit, the underframe, the trucks, everything takes, by far for me, has been the area of the most practice. Not that everything else doesn't take a lot of practice, but the underframe seems to have been the area where I've needed a lot of practice. And luckily, not on all engines, but on a lot of engines, the underframe, luckily, is painted black or a dark color a lot of times. And unfortunately, on some railroads, it's not. But the thing I recommend is, considering, I don't know, 4 out of 5 times it's painted black, the thing I would recommend as you're practicing drawing is to draw railroads that have black underframes. And I'm starting on a handrail here now. And the handrails, again, are just something, they stick out. So the front and back handrail make them be the same height. And all the handrail. But I know I kept talking about the underframe, but the underframe shouldn't be a whole reason why you pick a drawing. But to tell you the truth, if you feel like your strength on the trucks and stuff, you know, it's the kind of thing where you would be surprised that when you paint it black or a dark color, a lot of that detail gets a little bit covered up. And believe me, there are a lot of very colorful locomotives that are very historic and colorful. And as I work on the handrail, there's always sort of a good feeling when you're putting the handrail on that, wow, I'm almost done. I mean, you might put the handrail on at a different stage than me, because believe me, don't do it in the exact, you don't have to do it in the exact order that I'm doing it. But it doesn't hurt to do it in this order. And there with that last grab of handrail, and as I said, there's the rear light, and basically the pencil lines are now done. Now that the pencil lines are done, we basically start to eyeball the engine for lettering. And as we look at lettering, the first really important thing to do is to look at where the basic brakes and the paint lay on the engine. And usually when I look at it, like if I look at a photo, or in this case I'm looking at the drawing, like some of the easiest places that you can kind of see is that you see, okay, well, this separation here between the red and the orange goes basically right at the cab, right underneath the windows. So you kind of say to yourself, okay, well, if it goes right through the windows, you basically say, well, that's, in this case, right at almost 2 inches. So you say, okay, well, that's, and I'll even be very precise, it's 61/64. That's, I know, very, very precise seeming, but it's pretty important to be pretty precise, because what you do is you say, okay, it's 61/64. Because what you need to do is you go, here's a place on the train, 61/64 and 61/64, and then right here it's 61/64. And what happens is that you basically, you draw and you see that the brake stops right there because there's the black anti-glare, and you look for these little marks that you make, because one of the most important things, I've seen this myself, and I've heard this, you know, a lot of other people in different fields of art talk about this, but horizontal lines are very important to keep straight, because even more important than the up and down, the vertical and all that, because your eye sees if these lines start to, and even here I can see a little bit my line, see, and that's why it's good to have my line started to go a little bit up. And the more you draw, the more you'll start to see that. So, and it's good to catch it, it's really good to catch it in the pencil lines, because once you start to paint the engine, it starts to be pretty difficult to catch it. And you see the next break of the orange, and it goes right through these rear intakes. So, and it's a little bit above the handrail, so you basically kind of say, okay, that's a little above 1.5 inches, and 1.5 inches is 48, so right above that is 50. And 50 is kind of a nice round number, but you don't really, if it had been 51, I would even say 51. But the thing about it is that you want to mark several areas, because you do not want that line to start going down and up and down and up. You want that line to go straight across, because just like all these other little areas I've talked about where the grills get, you know, skewed, this is probably the most important part of your drawing. Really, it really is this line being straight. I mean, there's other parts too, like you want your paint to be smooth, that kind of stuff, but this line being straight is a very, very important part of your drawing. That's how seriously this line needs to be taken. Because your eye will look at that paint break where the orange and the red separate, and it will look for it to be straight. And now we look, as we've drawn the horizontal breaks, it's important, when I'm drawing these, I usually am looking at a photograph, and it's important in a photograph to see where the break goes around the nose and around the rear. And in this case, as I said, this is where it's very helpful to have a template that has a curve on it. In this case, I'll just do it by hand. But if you have a template with a nice big curve, I recommend just doing that, because it takes a lot of practice to make a nice tight curve. And see, part of why it's good to have a couple of good photographs is because if you only have the front, you don't know, is this going to just wrap around the back, this straight line, or is it going to curve down? And it's good to polish up on your Florida East Coast history because, you know, some engines, you know, the F units, there was no rear, and the Jeeps, you know, so there's a different back, and the basically the SD40-2s, this is very similar to that paint scheme. So it's good to know all the different paint schemes, and the more that you know, you can look at the different paint schemes, and you can basically, and here we basically put the stripes. And it's always a good idea to, when you look at the stripes, to keep them as straight as you can. And now here, this is, as one of the things you're going to hear from me is 5 minutes ago I said this is the most important part of your drawing. Well, now I'm going to tell you this is the most important part of your drawing. The secret you're going to learn from me is it's all the most important part of your drawing, because there's lots of important parts. But again, you're about ready to write the word Florida East Coast. And if you write the word Florida East Coast, it's important that you count the letters. 1, 2, F, L, O, R. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The spaces are about 2 letters. 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20 letters in the word Florida East Coast, basically, if you count the spaces. And it's going to go in an area that's about 3.5 inches long. This is why, part of why I have a calculator here, is 3.5 inches long and times 32, because I put it into 30 seconds, divided by 20. Each letter will be basically 5/32 of an inch, which that's good to know, because the F, the L, the O, the R, and the I is a little smaller. The I, the D, and the A, and then the space is 2 times 5 is 10. And I know that that just threw a lot of math into the game. E, A, S. It doesn't need to be that complicated. E, A, S, T. Once I'm done measuring this, I'll explain it a little bit more. C, O, A, S. I'm sorry if I threw a lot of math at you, but I'll explain it here in a second as I start to measure.